Hey, what's up, everybody? I'm going to try to make this as quick as I can. Little brief tutorial here on how to objectively evaluate your speed drills. Okay, so if we're talking about specificity, what that is how exercises or movements relate. Okay, so specificity is the main mechanism for transfer. Okay, so we're talking transfer. How much contribution does an exercise, a drill, or a movement have towards the competition movement in that setting? Okay, but remember, transfer can be neutral, it could be positive, or it could be negative. So my influence when it comes to the lenses themselves that I evaluate drills, one lens, dynamic correspondence, I'm very much influenced by some of the Vygotsky model, teased in with Franz Bosch. And then my other lens I'm evaluating drills is I'm looking at it through an environmental based type of lens. So I'm gonna go through these fairly quick here. I'll give examples maybe on a different video. So when I look at a speed drill, right, through this lens of dynamic correspondence, how does this drill, this exercise, or this movement relate to the sport competition movement in terms of these variables? Number one, movement outcome, right? Does it look and smell and taste and feel like sprinting? Okay, so this is an easy one, really. And if I quote Vygotsky on this, it's really in terms of the correspondence. Okay, we're looking at the entire complex of interacting motor actions which resolve the motor task most effectively. Okay, so if you're doing a speed drill, it's a sprinting drill. Yeah, that probably has great correspondence to sprinting your 40, your 60, your 100 meter, right? Number two, movement characteristics. Now we're looking more kinematics. So I'm looking at some of the joint angles. I'm looking at some of the limb action. And specifically some of the limb, the trunk action, I'm looking at range of motion, so the amplitude. And I'm also looking at the direction of the movement. Is it vertical, horizontal? Is there a rotational component to it? That's how I'm evaluating this very specific component here with dynamic correspondence. Right, third one, dynamics of effort. Right, this one's a little bit tricky here because I added a few things to it, but if we go traditional, again, Vygotsky model, we're looking at the lens through force. So we're saying the magnitude of force or the rate of force. We got to be careful though too, because most of these forces are indirectly measured, GPS 1080 sensors, things like that. When we're doing drills, and you might not even have that technology during the drill itself, you may, right, if you're lucky, if you're fortunate. But if I also have an inclusion of, let's say, velocity, then we can look at the velocity of the limb and the movement itself. And then we can look at maybe power-based metrics as well. Why? Because then we have force, we have velocity. Okay, but again, this is one component of dynamic correspondence, a single component. All right, number four, accentuated region of force production. So we're really looking at the joint angle. Is it the specific joint angle where you maximize torque and force development? Okay, whatever that is, if that's your hip, your ankle, whatever that is that the exact position in terms of the joint kinematic positioning to express the greatest amount of torque or force? That's another component I'm going to use to evaluate the drills. All right, these next two, intramuscular coordination, intermuscular coordination. So number 6 here, intra, within a single muscle fiber itself, or muscle group itself, like, do we have more of an isometric effect with a different muscle group? This comes into play a lot with the hamstring, where there's been a lot of debate on, it's just an eccentric action during the swing phase. No, it's an isometric action during the swing phase. So you can start to use that criteria to evaluate specific, maybe muscle groups during the movement itself. Or intermuscular coordination, number 7, more this connectiveness. We're looking at maybe like force sharing, meaning that there's the sharing of forces between body segments or joints or muscle groups, and force dampening, things like that. So really, how does the structure coordinate the task itself? Okay. Number 7, straightforward, the physiology of it. We're just really looking at the dominant energy systems in that case. Okay. Number 8, sensory stimulus. This one could be tricky because if it's straight ahead sprinting, let's say, there might not be that much of a difference. So the correspondence is probably very similar. But this becomes a very important criteria for myself when I see people claiming that they're training agility-based movements for football, soccer, etc., then I come back to this criteria a lot. So the visual input, the visual in terms of the perceptual input itself, even the vestibular inputs, things like that is how I integrate this 8th component. Okay, so that was one lens. The second lens is just the environment itself, so the environmental context. Okay, and this is extremely important lens, extremely, when we talk again about, hey, I train football players. Okay, so you're telling me you train football players, so they're getting paid, maybe actual money, maybe it's a scholarship, maybe it's to play on a high school team, not paid, but they're trying to be on that team. They're football players. Is that their environment at all? So then is the exercise you're doing saturated in an environment with zero or minimal transfer, right? A representation of the competition environment, all the way to the opposite side where, it'd be completely represented, such as a sporting skill itself. In that case, has direct positive transfer. And I'm not saying you have to have every drill have direct positive transfer in terms of this environmental context. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying some people have zero almost on all their drill sequences for certain athletes. Okay, so this would also include some of the sensory information, and then it would tie into Rob Gray's idea of perception equals action, action equals perception. So there's this coupling effect. Do you even take that into account for your drills for various athletes? Okay, and this is how I evaluate when I see somebody's drills online. I'll just put on these 2 lenses, and I'll go through my criteria to say, yes, a lot of specificity and transfer, or not so much. Okay, it's a continuum.